Good morning. This is the Blaine's World podcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You get more information and listen to previous shows at our website, which is www.blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely Fairview, North Carolina. Each week, we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And to that end, it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest, and he is freelance musician Adam Rose. And Adam, you can feel free to wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this. So if you're watching it, that's Adam. And I had the pleasure actually of seeing Adam in at a show, I guess not too long ago. It was about a month ago, maybe?
Yeah, if even.
Yeah, it was it Rock of Ages?
Rock of Ages, sure.
At Hendersonville Theater. And you and the other musicians just killed it. Just love that show. But can you imagine getting to play rock music in a show? That was that the first time you ever did that kind of thing?
No, you didn't. Yeah, on stage. I've played in musical theater sometimes, but to be on stage and be part of the acting a bit was interesting.
Well, yeah, that was cool, right? And you're actually in the show itself. Adams lived and performed in Philadelphia, New York City, Los Angeles, Durham, and Asheville. He moved to the area last year after completing a master's degree in jazz performance and arranging at North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina. So the question I ask, first of all, when I have somebody on as a guest, Adam, is as a kid, you grew up where?
I grew up in Philadelphia, in Center City.
Okay. And when you were a kid growing up, when did you take up the guitar?
I actually took up the guitar when I was about 10. I think as a little kid, there was a guitar around the house. My mom gave me a couple classical guitar lessons, and I didn't really do anything with it. It didn't stick. And then when I was about 10 years old, I went to a Quaker camp on the Chesapeake Bay, and they would have these big Dale Quaker meetings, and the music was like folk songs of the 70s, a lot of Neil Young, a lot of Eagles. 3 or 4 guitars playing that, and then, a couple hundred people singing along in the woods. So that's what made me want to learn.
And you were just a kid at that point in time.
Oh, sure.
That time, maybe a little before then, do you know Phil Oakes? You ever hear of Phil Oakes?
I know the name, yeah.
Yeah, anyway, he was my favorite guitarist and musician, but he was probably in the late 60s, maybe a little bit before you.
Okay.
But anyway, so you started playing 10 years old or whatever. Did you then take lessons or go to school for it?
Yeah, I kind of, I had friends teach me. I'd learn songs here and there from friends, and then I would take a few lessons and kind of digest that and chew on that and make up my own songs. I always was writing songs. And as the years went on, I gradually got kind of more formal. I think I got in a jazz band in high school, and then that involved, you've got to learn how to read notes and things. So I actually played when I was in Philly. Right after high school, I took a year off and played at this group called the Clef Club, which is just a really historical, great jazz organization. It was a black musicians union a long time ago when there's segregation. It turned into kind of a jazz musicians union. Long story short, they had a youth ensemble, and that was my first experience playing jazz, getting paid. So that kind of launched me into that world, and then I studied jazz at college. I studied classical, got a lot more formal as the years went on.
You remember the very first performance you ever did that you got paid for? Do you remember it?
Let's see. I remember that era. There are a couple that stood out. The biggest one that stood out was in Philadelphia. There was a jazz club called Zanzibar Blue on Broad Street that was very fancy, and people would get dressed up. It was a supper club, and I remember playing there and that on their stage. That was a big deal.
Now I'm looking behind you. I see some guitars. How many guitars do you have?
I have about 8 guitars.
Okay, but I don't see behind you. I'm looking for a framed check. The very first check you ever got. That you didn't frame it behind you to remember.
Right. Yeah, I should have done that. That check's long spent. It didn't go too far anyway.
Do you have a preference as to what kind of music you play?
So I play a lot of different genres, and I have played. To me, what I enjoy is the approach. What I described maybe broadly as a jazz approach, but I enjoy playing. I'm currently in a country project, an Americana project. I did the musical theater project. I play straight ahead jazz, traditional jazz. To me, the main thing is if you're playing with good musicians and everyone's listening to each other and adapting as you go, and you're not too hung up on the predetermined plan. You're just listening and adapting. So I like that approach. So it's kind of a jazz approach, but if you're with good musicians playing rock, playing country, any kind of music, it's a good time.
Well, it's interesting because you raised the issue of playing with the other musicians. Do you have a preference either playing with other musicians or by yourself?
I would say playing with other musicians is where the challenges happen, where the growth happens. If you get a chance to play with people who are better than you, which I always try to do, you develop a lot quicker. You learn a lot. You can pick up ideas from them. Solo is being completely exposed. I just did a 3-hour solo guitar gig the other day. You know, there's nowhere to hide. So it really forces you to master your fundamentals and be confident, and it's its own challenges.
Where was that gig?
That most recently, I play at the Grove Park Arcade in downtown Asheville.
Okay.
Saturdays here and there. That was probably a week ago. They've been doing some music series indoors there.
Now, have you ever been a busker? Have you ever
I've
played
done
on
a
the
little
street?
busking, sure. Yeah, when I lived in New York City for a few years as a student, and I spent some time busking in the subway or out in Astor Place. Yeah.
Is that tough?
If you're doing it with friends, it can be really fun.
Yeah.
You know, I think if you're out there alone doing solo and you're feeling pressure to make a certain amount of money, then it can be tough.
Now, when you play, you said in the street or you play elsewhere, so you play the guitar, do you sing also?
I do, yeah. I've worked singing more and more. I know a lot of the projects I do, I'll sing harmony, or if I'm doing like a 3-hour solo jazz gig, I'll end up singing a handful of songs. But I was a guitarist, you know, for many years before I felt comfortable being a singer. But yeah, now I sing too. I sing jazz. I had a original Americana rock band years ago where I sang lead, so I do
I
that as well.
was going to ask you, do you also write music?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been writing music since that's kind of my way of learning. I would take a chord, I might know 2 or 3 chords, and I'd push them around on the neck and come up with all the different possibilities and what happens if I move one finger, and just started putting things together. And so I've been writing songs from day one. Not all of them good, but I've written a lot of songs.
Do you have a collection of them or a ballpark? How many songs have you written?
Well, that's the thing. Once you get, I used to, it was a little like bringing home a beautiful rock you found on the beach, say, or a shell or something, you know, where the first few you find are very special and you bring them home. And I would, you know, I had a 4-track originally before I could really write music, you know. I'd record songs on that. I probably recorded a couple dozen, maybe 100. And then it gets to the point as I start getting into jazz where it starts becoming more a codified process where it's less this special, unique thing, even though every song is special and unique. And it's more, okay, I know what I'm doing now. I'm playing the 1 to the 4 to the 5 to the 3. And you kind of, jazz to me is just a lot of possibilities. It's like songwriting, but you're coming up with many songs that you could possibly play over a set of chords, if that makes sense. So I kind of evaded your answer, but I'd say I've written down or recorded probably hundreds of songs, but I've forgotten probably thousands of songs.
So when you write a song, and I guess you could do it more so in jazz, you write it down, but then it evolves and changes as you over the years.
Sure, yeah, yeah. If you're writing it down, I mean, jazz, it's always changes every performance because the bass player might play something different, the drummer might play something different. You know, you might write it as a guitarist, thinking a guitarist, and then you have a gig with a saxophonist, and he or she's playing the melody, and that frees you up to do other things. So there's always evolution and interpretation with those.
So these songs that you have written, are they available anywhere or performed?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I recorded a jazz album recently. I said, you know, I want to finally just commit some things to recording with upright bass and drums, and a couple of them have a friend who plays sax and flute. Those are out on my Bandcamp. It's Adam Rose 2 at bandcamp.com.
It's also on, so that's you can find that on the internet.
Yeah,
Is that best way to find your stuff?
I think so. You know, if you come to see me at a gig, I usually have a couple hard copies. I printed up hard copies because I wanted to radio stations like, as you know, hard copies. So they're one of the last, CDs, physical CDs are getting rarer and rarer because not everyone has CD players.
I finally switched at him to now listening to on my phone, because I had this whole collection of CDs, and what's incredible, you may know this, cars don't even offer CD players anymore,
Right.
So,
Right.
like you said, the CDs, it's a kind of a dying thing. But I want to give Hendersonville Theater in particular credit that I love it. I don't know about you, but I love theater, especially when I see live musicians, as opposed to, I don't know how you feel about it, but tracks drive me crazy,
Yeah.
and to save money, theaters are moving in that direction. But I don't know, it's just not the same.
It's part of the performance. It's like, I guess if you just needed a robot to read the script, you could save money instead of having actors. But there's something really exciting about seeing humans perform and take chances.
What you said is spot on, because that's my argument. Some say we still have to pay musicians, but we don't have to pay actors. And like you said, well, what are we next going to have? Robots? Or are we going to have just people mouthing the words, the singers, if you can do it with musicians? But I don't know about you. It's just, I don't even like seeing a show that has canned music or whatever.
Yeah.
It's
It's exciting seeing. I remember as a kid, my mom took me to a couple of Broadway plays, and they used to have the band, the pit orchestra, under the stage, but
right,
you
right.
could see the conductor and maybe a couple musicians, and that was always exciting watching them.
And as you're saying, as a kid, you go to a show and there'd be an orchestra, though, of 10, 12, 15 people. And now if you see two or three, it's a lot. You're grateful.
Yeah.
But you guys rocked it. Talk about the process then when you were at Hendersonville Theater, where you did Rock of Ages. Is that the first time you had ever done that?
That's the first time I'd ever done that show. And that I grew up on 80s rock.
Right.
That's what got me into guitar. That was the guitar's heyday. So it's funny, learning all the solos from, Def Leppard, Pour Some Sugar on Me, and there was some Motley Crue, and there were just some great classic 80s rock that I kind of knew, but I had never actually really learned note for note. So it was a great opportunity to do that.
And the guitar was the key. The guitar always was the key.
Yeah.
But talk about then, as a kid, you grew up. Now, do you also teach guitar to people?
Sure. Yeah. I teach guitar, bass, piano, voice, drums. There was, at this moment, that's not my focus, but I have students come by. They'll come to the house. Usually what happens now is people see me playing out, and they'll come by for a lesson or two, and I tend to give them enough to work on for months, and then I see them in a few months. But there were several years where that was all I did, 30 lessons a week,
Wow.
6 days a week. That was my main source for a while.
How many instruments do you play?
Let's see, guitar, piano, bass, drums, sing. And then there are all these, everyone in North Carolina especially plays guitar. A lot of people also play banjo, mandolin. So I can, I play those as well. I can fake my way on those. I just got a lap steel the other day I like playing around with.
Let me ask you another question too. When either somebody comes to see you or even yourself, how does the practice come into the process? Like, do you practice every day?
Yeah, for sure. Every day, every once in a while, I'll have to take a day off because my wrist needs rest now. But just about every day.
How long do you practice?
Well, when my hands are in good shape, I'll practice 5 or 6 hours if I can.
Really?
I enjoy it. Yeah.
Do you? And so when you practice, is that like a specific thing, or you just play different things all the time when you practice?
I have, kind of like you make a to-do list.
Right.
I have a to-do list for songs that I need to learn in the jazz world, and there's an endless number of there. And I'll either have to learn those because someone I'm working with that week wants to play those, or they're really challenging and I've got to chisel away at them. And then I got a to-do list for whatever project I'm on, if I'm working on originals or covers. And then I'll try to focus on like 3 or 4 technical things, scales. I'm always working on those. And it takes however long it takes to master. It might take weeks, it might take months or years. And then I add new things to the list.
You mentioned something I never thought of, but that playing the guitar, it can hurt your hand or wrist, or it's like, do guitars get carpal tunnel?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the amount of, like I said, I started when I was a little kid. And so, your wrists are made for a certain amount of wear and tear. And I think every year you play guitar is probably like 5 or 6 or 10 years of wear and tear just in the average world. You're contorting your hands. And so, yeah, I've had to be aware of that now that I've been playing for 3 decades now. So it's something that I can't just go. I used to be able to play 7, 8 hours, gigs, practice every day of the week, and never have to think about it. Now now have to be aware of it.
Is that something you can build up your hand or your muscles or wrist to get so it doesn't bother you?
Um, yeah, I mean, I got to like there was most of my life I never thought about it, and then I had a brief period, luckily, where I was in a lot of pain, and then I just learned some stretches and taking breaks, and I think I'm in that building up. So I'm not bothered by it. I don't have pain or anything, but I have to be very aware of how much I practice now.
But some guitarists who feel pain or they can't perform as a result?
I know a lot of guitarists who, especially jazz guitarists, people when they get a little older who've either had to get surgery or they've had to put the guitar down for a while or completely. Yeah, that's kind of one of those unfortunate things.
A typical day for Adam Rose is what? You get up and you then go right into practice, or what do you do?
Yeah, I kind of check my calendar and see what gigs I have coming that week, and then I kind of practice based around. I have, like I said, I've got some kind of steady things that I'm always working on, and then I kind of tailor my practice schedule around a gig that might be that night or maybe a couple days. Um, and that's I might have a lesson during the day that I'll do either Zoom or someone might come by, and then I'm playing about 5 to 8 gigs every week. So
What?
I might, if come evening, I'm probably out somewhere playing a gig somewhere.
That's pretty impressive. That 5 to 8 in a week, it's pretty cool. But what also bothers me, Adam, and perhaps you also, is the fact that people object to paying musicians. At times, it's the old. Well, you get exposure, Adam. You can just come and people see you and play. And then what you're mentioning, I didn't realize how many hours it takes. Just to do one show or one gig, it takes hours, if not weeks, if not years, to
Yeah.
get there. But people sort of forget that. Um,
Yeah, everyone. I mean, it's a tough thing because when you're playing and you make music, you want it to be heard, you want to find an audience, and I think every musician probably has passed through a stage where they were taken advantage of and have to learn how to navigate that. But I certainly have played for exposure a few times, and then I eventually want to.
Exposure doesn't pay the bills, though, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. You can die from exposure.
Well, yeah, exactly. But I saw some theaters. I thought this was a great idea, Adam. I don't know if you've seen it, but they now add a tip on for musicians. It's Have you ever heard of that? I thought it was great. You know,
That's a good idea. Yeah.
you go to the restaurant, tip for the service, but then if you want to hear the music, why don't you tip on it, as opposed to you having to rely on I guess, the good graces of the owner or something and pay you something. But it can be a tough buck to make for some people.
Yeah, yeah, in the restaurant business, especially if you're working in jazz at you have those great gigs where you play with a wonderful artist or you play at a famous club, but you're basically, as people have said to me, you're in the service industry. You're kind of like a waiter or a bartender. You're working in the restaurant industry, and that's a tough business. I've played in a lot of places, and they're around and they're doing great, and then 2 years later they're bankrupt. So it's and a lot of owners. I think Asheville is very fortunate that there's a live music culture, and the restaurants do support live music, as much as they can, and they kind of value music. I've being in Asheville about a year, I've found that it's been a nice culture for live music.
You have a preference as to the venue you play in? A club or restaurant or concert? What's your favorite?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it depends on the music. Sometimes, I mean, if it's original music and it's stuff you've worked on and you've rehearsed with people and you've put together a show, you really want to be in a high-end listening room where people are going, they're paying money to see you and they're focused on you and listening. That's otherwise, your feelings could get hurt, but you feel like you're being ignored. But on the flip side, I also do like really the complete flip side of that is where I'll do a solo guitar in a restaurant, and people call that a wallpaper gig. No, you know, random person might come up to you afterwards and say, I really enjoyed that, or give you a tip, or sometimes you get random smattering of applause. But that is the opposite, because you have no one's on, all the eyes aren't on you. People are
Right.
living their lives, they're enjoying their food, and that kind of frees you up just to try things maybe you couldn't try if it was a stage and it was a high pressure environment. So those two ends I like. The stuff in the middle isn't as fun, where you're putting on a show and people are playing pool and talking to themselves, and but that's, anytime I still feel very fortunate. Anytime I get a chance to play and do music for a living, I feel gratitude for that.
One of the things I try to do, I don't do it all the time, but after I see a show, especially if it's a theater show, I'll try to stay for the musicians at the end, where they play after, the show is over, and actually thank them. And not too many people do, to recognize the key is, musicians add a lot to a show, and so I wish we would get more recognition, from other people or to say thank you to it. The
That's
in
nice
terms,
that you do that. When people come to me after a show and say, I just played a show today, and 4 or 5 people come to me afterwards, and it's great, even if it's just thanks.
well,
It's a nice feeling.
Dave Bruce will tell you, I'm kind of a friend of his, and yeah, I follow him around. Wherever he plays, I'll be there, and then I always see him afterward. We take a picture with him afterward. Just a really good guy, but
Yeah.
he's pretty active in the Asheville scene, and I mean, you'd be playing 4 or 5 gigs a week. That's pretty nice number of gigs a week, especially if you get paid. If you don't get paid,
Yeah.
that's another thing. I guess as a musician, you can always find gigs that to do for free if you want to.
Oh, I guess. Luckily, I'm not looking for those, but I think there are, yeah, sure. There's, when I was 20 and I was hungry, I played a few free gigs, but that's usually a dead end, you know. Unless there's, if the president of Columbia Records is in the audience.
Well, even like you're saying, boy, is that changing though? It used to be records and CDs and whatnot, and
Right.
that whole thing has changed now. Like you said, the CDs, you probably even have to not beg to give them away, but people don't want CDs anymore.
Right. I trade a lot. I actually went out the other day. I bought a boom box, because
Okay,
the only CD player I have is in my car.
right.
And, we all give CDs to each other. I trade my CDs with other musicians, and I realized I don't want to sit in the driveway and listen to this. So I bought a tape deck cassette player.
Well, me too. It's the same thing too. And I had this whole CD collection, but now I can't do anything with it because I listen to Apple Music. You can get
Yeah.
every song, and I'll send you about Phil Oakes. I'll send you his music, but you get any music that's ever been played in the history of whatever. That's pretty cool on a phone. Whereas I had to buy a box, right, and carry it around. And
Right.
I have this CD collection I can't do very much with. People don't, use it as much.
Right.
Who is your biggest influence as a musician?
So, growing up, I think the first big influence was MTV. I was definitely an MTV kid. That's why I picked up a guitar. I thought that they play guitar and then they have limos and jets. So I thought naturally that would follow. But it's after that, it became very personal. Like when I went to that Quaker camp, I learned there was always a kid a few years older than me who could do cool things. And so I would emulate that person for a few months until I could figure out what they were doing, or a year, and then I'd emulate another person, a friend of my older brothers. And then a big jazz legend in Philadelphia was Jimmy Bruno, which if you're in the jazz guitar world, you know the name. And when I got to high school, we would be able to go out and see him a couple times a week, and he was the fastest person I'd ever seen in person. So I emulated him. That sometimes I still do. That's what got me into jazz guitar, but. I go through phases like anyone goes through phases with listening. Any phase that people go through with their tape collection or their CD or records, I do the same thing. But when I'm going through that, I try to learn it. So, I've gone through a reggae phase and Bob Marley. I've gone through classic rock. For a very brief minute, I got into heavy metal. And now for me, it's mostly, I listen to a lot of classic country from like the 50s and 60s. At first, I used to not think there was much to that. 3 chords, what's the big deal? But then I started listening to what's going on with the guitars, and it's really high quality playing. So that jazz from that period, blue note jazz from the 50s and 60s, trad jazz earlier. I mean, I loved Andre Segovia. I could go
Okay.
on and on. I'll wrap myself.
Jimmy Bruno still around?
Yeah, he's still around.
Okay.
He's still out there playing. You know,
Well,
yeah.
if you remember, if you could find him, you could send him a copy of this interview where we talked about Jimmy Bruno.
Yeah.
That's cool. Is there any guitar player that you would actually go to see in concert? You know, for the in Asheville or wherever, would you go out every way to see somebody?
Yeah, I mean, I go out to see anytime I have a free night and I'm not exhausted. I'll go out to see my friends play. You know, there's a lot of them. I mean, I'm playing in. I got one of the early groups I played with here was Drayton and the Dreamboats. I don't. People in Asheville know them. It's a blend of jazz and classic
Yeah,
country, and
I know the name. Yeah.
you know, yeah. So they're a great band. I played with them a lot, and if I'm not playing with them, I'll try to go catch them. Um, God, I mean, Town Mountain's a big legendary name in town. I'll see them. Queen Bee and the Honey Lovers, for people who like trad jazz and swing music, I first played with them in Durham and started listening to them, and they're great. Every once in a while I'll play with them, and if I have a free night, I'll try to go check them out.
If somebody's listening wants to become a jazz musician or just a musician in general, what advice would you give them?
Don't do it. No, I'm just so, you know, like you alluded to earlier, music's changing. When I grew up and you had MTV, the myth, or you know, there was a recording industry at least when I was growing up, which you, that was a big industry. You had microphone, you had, you know, so you had a studio. There were engineers just setting up the equipment. There were producers getting everyone together. There's a lot of physical real estate involved. And this giant industry built around making music, you know, and recording it that people would then buy. And as we now know, you know, 10, 20 years, people don't, myself included, people don't buy music. You know, I have a subscription to streaming, you know,
Right.
an annual, but so it's different now. I'm really, I kind of lucked out with Asheville. I didn't move here for music. I moved here for other reasons, but I found that okay, there's still a live music scene here, and I'm able to make a living performing music with lots of different people, and I feel really lucky. I enjoy that. So anything that's worked for me probably won't work for someone 10, 20 years down the road with the technology, but it's important to be very, very good. It's a very competitive industry. So you have to be good at music, and you have to be open to lots of different genres. You know, there are people that only do classical, only do jazz, only do rock. And that's never interested me as a listener. That's never interested me personally. And I think why I'm able to do okay now is because I'm so flexible. I'm very musically flexible. And you have to be very good. You have to take every bit of training you can get, and you have to be very flexible and listen to everything.
How about training via YouTube? You know, I don't know if you do any of it, but people tell me that they learn stuff, chords, or learn other stuff just watching YouTube. Can that be done?
Yeah, it can be. There's a lot of good stuff on YouTube. There's a lot of junk on YouTube. So it's like the internet, you know.
Right.
Could you just not go to high school and just take math courses and science on YouTube and learn, you know,
I
take
guess,
English
yeah.
lit? Maybe, but there's a lot out there. I would definitely check in with someone from time to time to help them you sort through all the stuff that's out there.
And even in terms of you, I'm impressed. You said, I guess just recently you finished. When did you finish your degree in?
Yeah, I got a master's in music in Durham. I just finished that a little over a year ago.
And that's pretty cool. What brought that on? Just all of a sudden you decided you want to get a master's?
Uh, it was a circumstance. I think what's made me a jazz musician is that I like all genres and I'm a true improviser, you know, not just in music. I've always improvised throughout my life. So it was never part of the plan. I was in Philly where I met my wife, and she got a job in Durham. So we ended up in Durham, and I was just playing out on the town as I do and meeting people and making music. And uh, I met the guitar director of a school down there, and he said, you know, we need a graduate assistant in guitar next year. Are you interested? You know, it was a stipend, it was free tuition. I said, that sounds great. You know, it's a great deal. So, of course, there's some really incredible musicians down in Durham that I didn't necessarily know until I was down there. But to name drop, you know, Brentford Marsalis teaches there. That's a name that
Okay.
people would know. And but a ton of names, you know. national and international people that are playing and teaching down there. So
I mean, that's pretty cool on your part that all of a sudden you go back to school for a master's, and how long did that take you to get?
it was 2 years, and the first year was COVID. The first year was online.
Oh, that's
So,
right. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
So
I
2
mean,
years.
I give you a lot of credit. In terms of upcoming shows, you have anything that's coming up?
Yeah, I've got a couple upcoming shows. I've got this Saturday. I'm playing with. I'm really excited. Some great jazz musicians. A saxophonist, multi-instrumentalist, Will Boyd. He's he kind of covers the Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina circuit amongst other locales. Teaches at a lot of colleges. He's a great musician. So he put me on a gig with a bassist, Joseph Butts, who people will know, a really great Asheville bassist, and Justin Watts, a great jazz drummer. And that's just across the border in Tennessee. It's at the Bonnie Kate Theater in Elizabethton, Tennessee.
Yeah, it's going to be the Saturday night. Anything else coming up?
Yeah, that's Saturday night. And then more local, I actually play almost every Sunday at downtown Asheville at the Battery Park Book Exchange, which is a great place. If people have been there, it's a bookstore, rare books, champagne, charcuterie. It's kind of a cool combination. And I'm often there from 12:30 to 2:30. So this Sunday I'll be there as well.
And there you just by yourself, is that correct?
No, it's usually I'll play with upright bassist,
Oh, okay.
sometimes another guitarist, jazz standards, maybe sing a couple songs.
Very cool. And lastly, Adam, if folks want to get in touch with Adam Rose, or I guess one of two things. One, if they want to follow you or find out more about your music or hear some of your music, best bet is to do what?
So I think I dropped the Bandcamp. That's Adam Rose 2 at Bandcamp. That's where I got an album up there. There's a website, adamrosemusician.com, all one word. There's, some music samples, some contact. You can always email me. That's adamroseartist, all one word, at gmail.com.
Okay.
So,
and they could also get in touch with you too, any of those areas if they want to speak to you about lessons or teaching them.
Yeah, and I'm open. I'm a freelance musician. I answer my phone and emails quickly.
And last question, if you have a preference, of all the things you've done, and you've certainly done a lot of things, do you have a favorite thing you'd like doing?
I'll say, and this is true, the thing that's coming up tonight or what I'm doing now, it's really that I try to be as passionate as I can. If I'm playing, I played a gig at a senior center today, and yeah.
Which center?
I think it's called Ardenton.
Okay.
And that's not when people get into music. That's not one of the most glamorous gigs. I don't do a lot of those, but it was a great time. I made it. You kind of have the power to make any situation good. If you have a good mindset and you play with passion. So I always try to do that. And that was a great gig.
Very cool. And a last question: do you have, in terms of doing something in the future, is there a dream project or something you'd like to do?
I just want to keep. I'm a very slow learner. I've been playing music for decades. There were kids growing up who were very quick, and a lot of them, I feel like music was too easy. They became brain surgeons or something, Music, I've always progressed slow and steadily. And I just, without sounding like a cliche, I just want to continue to be able to progress. That's the plan. Practice as much as I can. And hopefully my hands hold out and keep getting better. I've met a lot of great people. I have a couple projects in the works that I'm superstitious. So I don't want to mention them until they're
Sure.
a little more solidified, but I have a lot of good things I'm looking forward to with some great musicians here. Outside of those specific projects, I get better at music. Every 6 months or so, I'll be able to play something that I thought I couldn't play maybe ever, or so I just want to be able to keep doing that,
Well, Adam Rose, I'd like to thank you for being my guest on this BLAINESWORLD podcast. I'd also like to thank my producer, Cappy Tassetti. Hopefully we'll bump into each other again sometime in person, having you play music. Adam,
yeah, that'd be great.
Okay,
Thanks
great,
for
Adam.
playing.
Likewise.